No, absolutely. I mean, people need to. I've said this a million times, but people need to think strategically with their brains and not always just think moralistically or think with their own personal opinions. I mean, this is why successful communist parties have been based on democratic centralism. You know, you debate things, you discuss things, you vote on them, and then you have unity of action because no one person is more important than the collective struggle. So, leftists hear this one line about welfare that they don't like, and it's like, let me take to Twitter to just vent my frustrations and call this factory worker evil and bad, and jump on board with the hate train that's going at him so I can get some likes. And that's looking at things emotionally. I'm sorry. To look at things strategically and soberly would be to say, 95% of this song is about class struggle, and it's popping off with working class Americans. So what does that tell us? And like, what I wish Marxists would have done is what we did: reach out to him and try and get an interview, right? Try and show that you know Marxism is the way towards actually changing the system, actually changing corruption, and class struggle, not these right-wing grifters. But what I've seen is the left dismiss this guy, call this guy evil, bad, and dumb, and then the right try to embrace him. Matt Walsh and all these corporate stooges are embracing him like this is an anthem for the right wing. And like you said, it's them thinking strategically more so than us, right? They recognize his popularity, and they're trying to utilize it to bring people into their political parties and their ideology. Whereas the left is just like, no, this guy's bad, toss him out. It's like, you guys got to use your brains. You can't just moralistically and impulsively respond to everything. Um, Sometimes you have to think strategically, and maybe you don't like his line about welfare. Maybe you think his position on welfare is wrong, but also talk about the 95% of the song that was awesome. That was about alienation. That was about corruption of the government. You have to find the rational kernel, and look at this song within our current conditions, right? Look at the material conditions that exist today that allowed a song like this, shitting on our corrupt government, to get so popular. And ask yourself, what does that mean? What does that mean that factory workers are producing art, criticizing the government, that's getting 27 million views? Strategically more so than, and morals are important, right? Like, I don't think most of us would be leftists or Marxists or socialists or whatever you call yourself. I prefer Marxist and socialist to calling myself a leftist, but we probably wouldn't be socialists if it wasn't for morality, right? We want to abolish hunger and war and exploitation and all of the terrible things that go on under capitalism, and we're motivated by our morals and motivated by our ethics, our own personal ethics. But sometimes you need to think strategically, right? Sometimes you need to put your immediate gut feelings aside and think about something a little bit more. And think about how a piece of art like this can be used strategically to advance class struggle. So ultimately, we can abolish all the things that we find morally abhorrent in the capitalist mode of production.
Right, and we also have to make a distinction between the cheap moralism, which I think we're seeing a whole lot of, and any genuine Marxist ethics or morality. And that's been one of the things that we've been trying to develop here. Noah just recently published his article, Walking the Walk, where he talks about how it is that a communist should compose themselves. The last two classes that we had for Marxism and the history of Western philosophy, we talked about Marxism or a Marxist ethic and the ethic that's implicit in Marx and Engels' work, as well as Lenin and Che, as an ethics of virtue, which is tied to activity and our practices and our habits, and how those are able to be oriented towards the development of the class struggle and towards creating a world in which we can flourish as individuals in a way that's compatible with a community that's also flourishing. So even when you look at it from a Marxist ethical point of view, it's still indubitable that this is an advancement in the class struggle. I'm sorry, there's people pointing out, like, one of the posts that I've seen has been like Oliver Anthony at the top, at the bottom, it's been a bunch of different country artists. I think 80% of them, of which have been dead. And then 20% of them, maybe 10,000 people know who the fuck they are. And I'm very sorry to say this, there might be singers that instead of having 95% in common with the class consciousness or socialist values or something, they have 100%. But if they're getting heard by 5,000 people, you're not doing much. We wish you the best, and we hope that you can, maybe someday have the influence of Oliver Anthony. But the class struggle is happening, regardless of, whether we're picking our noses on the sidelines or not. And the reality is that millions, tens of millions, and perhaps hundreds by this point of people are listening to Oliver Anthony, and he struck a chord with the vast majority of working people, at least in the U.S. and in other countries as well. That's an objective reality. We can't dance around it. We can't stick our heads in the sand and ignore it and hope for one day the purest, leftist country song that has come out in the last 2 years to end up getting tens of millions of views. I'm sorry, guys, but that's idealistic thinking. All these people that are like, why instead of listening to this, don't you listen to this? I don't know how archetypically utopian do you want to be. You're literally saying, why is the world like this? Let's just force another world into existence. And that's not how things work. If you're going to force another world into existence, you do that by having a concrete understanding of how the world is right now and working through it. You do that by understanding the Oliver Anthony phenomenon, why he connects with the people, and then developing the rational kernels in that to its logical conclusions, which would be a struggle for socialism and the conquest of political power by the working class. But just real quick, man, even that one line that bothered people, and frankly, I don't agree with the line. I personally survive on the basis of welfare as well, and if it wasn't for welfare, me and my family and my baby probably wouldn't be able to eat. So I have nothing against people on welfare. I'm against a system that makes it necessary for people busting their ass working to be on welfare, and that makes the welfare that people get so shitty. Like with when my wife was pregnant and she ended up having WIC, which is what they give to mothers and children. The foods on those lists weren't the healthiest. And even when you get something like food stamps, which allows you to just spend basically on any food you want, healthy food is expensive as shit. And you get a bigger bang for your buck if you go for the cheaper foods, which are usually unhealthy. So we do have to criticize the welfare system in our dictatorship of capital, which is amongst the worst in capitalist countries in general. And that was something very big in the Bernie campaign, showing the contrast between the U.S. and other quote unquote developed countries. But even this line, which some people found problematic, it ended up being that the interpretation that Eddie provided, specifically in that conversation with Julie, which many people considered to be, I don't know, they criticized it as way too generous or, basically way too generous.
Some people were saying we were desperate to find any meaning of this, any meaning in his lyrics that weren't, he is evil, he should be canceled.
Exactly. Right. It ends up being what Oliver Anthony then explains with this honestly kind of funny post. He posts a Fudge round up there. And he says, our government likes to throw money at problems. True. Without not a lot of money, but it is true. Without conceptualizing real solutions that connect to the individuals involved. What's another way of saying it? Like, we just put cheap band-aids on top of shit without understanding the roots of it. The lyrics contrast that there are some left without any, and others who are only left with the option of living on junk food. Again, that's absolutely true, and it's one of the evils of, the form capitalist imperialism has taken in the belly of the beast in the U.S. Meanwhile, our farming industry has been corporatized and sold out. Absolutely true. What does that mean? It's been privatized. It's been transformed from being something that at least had some semblance of serving the community and serving people to something that its whole purpose is meeting profits and accumulating as much profit as possible. and exported abroad when it benefits the interests of capital. Food is entirely too expensive. True. Have you guys tried going to, a supermarket at all in this country? It's very much difficult to survive, especially if you're a working person. Especially in a nation with abundant farmland. Again, showing these contrasts, the paradoxes of capitalism: abundance on one end, and immiseration in the other. In politics, it's all about keeping people who are dependent. That's absolutely true. That's how you're able to control people, make them dependent on you. And why does why does wage slavery get perpetuated? Yes, in some cases it's ideology, people buying into capitalist ideology. But I do think the answer that someone like Vivek Shibber makes, which is it's not that they buy into it, is that they resign themselves to it. It's a process of resignation. Why? Because what the fuck is the alternative? You die. Like, there's not many other options. It's not like we have a communist party with 10 million members who can genuinely fight for socialism right now. Like, there's not a lot of alternatives for working people besides resignation. And when they have you at that point where it's death or continuing to live in the way that you're living, you're dependent on them for your livelihood. And that's a very weak position to be in. It's very difficult to build political power on that basis and to fight for your class interests on that basis. So that's the interpretation that he gave later on. Now, some people might say, that's him backpedaling. And honestly, if it's him backpedaling, I think that's even better than if it was him fucking what he actually implied. Because if he backpedaled, that means that he listened to the poor people who were uncomfortable with that line, and he changed his fucking mind. Isn't that better? And if that was what was originally implied, doesn't that show that maybe his future songs won't have those small hits at welfare that might be read as victim blaming? But yeah, I've been talking way too much. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're not allowed to change your position. Once you've said something, that's it. That's dialectics. Everything is static. Nothing can ever change. Nothing ever develops. If someone says something bad, they should be thrown in the furnace and incinerated. Just kidding, but that's how some of the people online act, man. And like people getting in there, look at the reaction to that tweet of us, just boosting what he said about the line about fudge rounds. People weren't willing to accept that he changed his position, or they were saying, he's just doing this to cope or whatever. Like you said, who cares? Who cares? You should be happy then that he came to your position. Like it shows that these people are less worried about the position, and more worried about canceling someone on Twitter or attacking somebody on Twitter who they deem as impure and immoral. But we got